thanks for that kind introduction, Jim. Very, very much appreciated. You know, we have today a very special individual. He's a scholar of classical civilizations. He's an author, columnist, historian, and we're grateful, as Jim mentioned, that this spring he'll be the William E. Simon Distinguished Visiting Professor here at the School of Public Policy. He'll be teaching a seminar on international relations and the global rule of Western civilization. Well, as you might suspect, Victor Davis Hanson has had a few other lives. I want to briefly mention some of them. He presently is the Martin and Illie Anderson Senior Fellow in Residence in Classics and Military History at the Hoover Institute at Stanford University. He's Professor Emeritus of Classics at California State University in Fresno. He's also, as I'm sure many of you know, a nationally syndicated columnist for the Tribune Media Services. He's received numerous awards and honors and fellowships. He was awarded the National Humanities Medal in 2007 and the Bradley Prize more recently in 2008. Dr. Hanson is the author of literally hundreds of articles, book reviews, scholarly papers, newspaper editorials on matters ranging from ancient Greek, agrarian, and military history to foreign affairs, domestic politics, and contemporary culture. He's written or edited 17 separate books. He's written for the New York Times, International Herald Tribune, and the New York Post, among others. He received his Bachelor of Arts from the University of California at Santa Cruz in 1975. He attended the American School of Classical Studies and received a PhD in Classics from Stanford in 1980. Okay, that's the official introduction. But let me go one step further. Although Dr. Hanson certainly has impeccable academic credentials, he does not fit the stereotype, if I could be so bold as to say an academic buried in the books of the stacks of a library, absent-minded about the world around him. Rather, Victor, as a fifth-generation Californian, still runs his family farm, which is located near Fresno, where his father and his grandfather before him raised grapes. In Victor's poignant memories of lessons learned from the daily physical work on his farm have often been captured in very eloquent elegies on the decline of the small farm, as well as the fortunes of Hispanic friends beside whom Dr. Hanson has worked his entire life. His best-selling book on California, entitled Mexifornia, demonstrates how his experience in farming the soil has informed his ability to put his impressive scholarship in perspective through his own real-life experiences. So, ladies and gentlemen, may I ask you to join me in welcoming an extraordinary individual, Dr. Victor Davis Hanson.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. I'm very happy to be at Pepperdine this semester, thanks to Bill and the foundation. I'm teaching a class on globalization and westernization, and we're trying to read texts that think globalization is the best thing since sliced bread, and the worst thing that's ever happened, a curse on the land. So it's a lively group of reading students, and I'm very happy to be here. I thought I would just speak for about 30 minutes on the change in government that we've experienced, and then I'd like to have questions from you. I usually say that I welcome questions. I just don't like to hear one question, the Cheney-Bush nexus and the Afghanistan-Halliburton pipeline. I get that almost everywhere I speak, although I probably won't get it here today. This was a very strange election of 2008. People said, first female vice president Republican ticket, first African-American serious candidate. We've had them before, but they weren't serious candidates. The oldest candidate, John McCain. My feeling was it was unique because it was the first orphaned election we had since 1952. By that I mean we had no incumbent president, nor did we have a vice president who was running. And that that meant that, like Harry Truman in 1952, both candidates were running against George Bush. I can't remember it, but I remember my parents, who were Democrats, telling me that they were so frustrated that Ike ran against Harry Truman, but so did Adlai Stevenson. And Truman went out with 22% approval rating. And that, I think, partly explains why Obama was successful. The Republicans can't quite figure out what the problem is. They're told that maybe it's just that after 8 years people get tired of one administration. It's very hard to have a 12-year continuum in any case. Had John Kerry ran again, he probably would have lost. So part of the problem for the Republicans was they had a charismatic, Werrell Posumu's hope and change, African-American new face. That was important, I think. The third was, it's kind of hard when you're a Republican and a conservative to run on a budget that is running a $500 billion debt. That's a felony for a Republican. It's only a misdemeanor for a Democrat. You expect that. But for a Republican, it's not good. You can argue Hurricane Katrina, you can argue 9/11, you can argue 2 wars, but ultimately that's a very good campaign talking point for the opposition. I think that hurt them. And then you can also say that this corrupt nexus that we've seen in the Democratic Party with Charles Rangel or William Jefferson or John Murtha, or the funny thing with Freddie and Fannie with Chris Dodd and Bernie, that's a misdemeanor for a Democrat. But when you have Duke Cunningham and Ted Stevens, then the party of fiscal probity suffers the additional weights of hypocrisy. And then finally, I think George Bush, who did some very good things, was not able to articulate them. So that in November there were far fewer people killed in Iraq than there was in Fresno. Nobody seemed to understand that. Nobody seemed to see what he was trying to do in Afghanistan and Iraq. They will, I think, in the next 2 years by contrast, but at the time they didn't. So we got Obama. And I'd like to make 3 general points and then shut up and go to the question. First is his domestic plan. I think it was pretty clear from what he said and what he had done in the past that he wanted a radical change. And this radical change represented a different philosophy about government and its relationship to the individual. So from November until the first 5 weeks, until I should say his first 4 weeks, we were told that we were almost in the Great Depression, or we were in fact in it. It was horrible, it was catastrophic. He exhausted the vocabulary of gloom and doom. And the reason was that he wanted to transform the government. Now some of you could say, well, this was a funny sort of depression. I don't know what the unemployment rate will be this week, but up until now it's been about 7.6, not the 10.3 of 1983. Inflation is low. For 93% of the people who are working and the 91% of the people who are paying their mortgages, they are getting $1 trillion stimulus. In fact, we all are. When the price of oil crashed from 147 all the way down into the 30s. That is a market-driven stimulus. We also got another stimulus when government financed debt that was sold to the Japanese and the Chinese and the European is paying about 0.5% of interest. That was compared to the 1970s when we floated our debt at 15%. That was a stimulus.